Welcome to Comics Bazaar, the channel of comics commentary and arcana. This video features Wolverine number 75, cover dated November 1993. So this is part of the Fatal Attractions crossover event marking the 30th anniversary of the X-Men. And this one follows on from X-Men number 25, that's X-Men Volume 2 number 25, focusing in on a major event from that issue, which was Magneto ripping the adamantium from Wolverine's body, and we see that moment here represented graphically by cover artist Adam Kubert and inker Mark Farmer. So I'll just move this around so you can see the hologram on this particular cover. Every one of these issues came with a hologram, and this hologram of Wolverine was designed by Adam Kubert, so it's designed from an Adam Kubert drawing. Pretty cool of Wolverine with his clothes popped, costume on, coming down an alley with the Empire State Building in the background. No, sorry, the Chrysler Building in the background, I think. Yeah, so nicely done. And I'll just open this up because, like all of those covers, it is a double cover. So you can see here it's kind of a reaction to the damage done to Wolverine. But it actually isn't in continuity with the previous issue because Cyclops here wasn't there aboard Avalon when the adamantium was ripped from Wolverine. And we see here his claws are still adamantium laced, but we're going to see something very different inside this issue. So let's open it up to the first page. And what we have here is, really I should show it to you on the horizontal like this. And we have the Blackbird, which was modified for spaceflight, and it is making a bumpy re-entry to Earth atmosphere, and that's because it has taken some damage and they're in trouble. And in particular, they're racing to get Wolverine back to the med lab with the Shi'ar technology in the X-Mansion, and things aren't going well, and they think they're losing him. And you can see here the rendition of the pain on his face and the remnants of his costume on his face too. So this is a dramatic opening to the issue. And here in the background we've got Bishop piloting the damaged Blackbird, and he tells Pietro, who was one of the strike team, to go aboard Avalon with Professor X to take over the commander's seat. And we'll see that pay out a little later. And then we get this great double page splash where the Professor and Jean are going into Wolverine's psyche in order to do what they can to assist him with the pain and try and keep him alive after the massive trauma he suffered. So here we see on this double page spread a great illustration of Wolverine's greatest enemies from recent years. We've got the Reavers there. We've got him crucified as he was in Uncanny X-Men 251. There's a video of that issue, tremendous issue, here on the channel. We have him wearing the Weapon X gear as well. And of course, that's calling back to Barry Windsor Smith's 1991 series on Marvel Comics Presents, and there are video reviews of that on the channel too. And we have Sabretooth, of course, and Lady Deathstrike. So, and also this kind of psychedelic Salvador Dali-esque illustration of the melting watch here, or clock, indicative, I suppose, or symbolic rather, of Wolverine's life ebbing away. And also these fish as well, these tropical fish and these spikes. So it's quite an interesting psychic environment here. And the title of the story is Nightmares Persist. And the creative team is Larry Hama, writer, Adam Kubert, penciler. This is his first issue on the title. Mark Farmer, Dan Green, and Mark Pennington, inkers. So Mark Farmer would be the regular inker with Andy and Adam Kubert, but because this is a double-sized issue, and because, as is acknowledged on the letters page, they were under time pressure, the deadline gun, Dan Green and Mark Pennington helped out. So I will point out when Dan Green takes over as inker, his style very distinctive, and Mark Pennington as well later on in the review. So Jean is asking the professor here, they have to get rid of all of these figures that are attacking Wolverine, but the professor says, no, you know better than that, Jean. I realize you're worried about Logan, but we must tread ever so cautiously here. These traumatic memories are interwoven into the fabric of Logan's personality. So Larry Hama in his run on Wolverine on the solo title explored a lot of that, particularly in tandem with and after Barry Windsor Smith's Weapon X series. This is a great page here, image of Magneto. So we've got a really acute up angle on Magneto, really nicely done, and then the adamantium metal being ripped out of Wolverine's body, and it looks painful, right? And we've got Jean and Professor X witnessing this in Wolverine's psyche. So, as I said, they're there to try and ameliorate the pain that Wolverine is feeling and to help him or assist him in the psychological trauma that he's undergoing. And the environment is one that's created by Wolverine's mind. And so this is a great little moment here where they find themselves on Wolverine's body himself in the Genesis tank, as Professor X says, at the Weapon X project. And here we see Hines, the secretary and computer expert, and Dr. Cornelius here in the background supervising the initial bonding of the adamantium with Wolverine. So interesting this, because Wolverine was unconscious for that event, but we see that nonetheless he was picking up on some of it. And this is a tremendous angle here that and Adam Kubert is drawing on Wolverine, and it recalls an image of Barry Windsor Smith's in Marvel Comics Presents number 75, I think, if I'm not mistaken. So great foreshortening here of the hands down to the arm, to the chest, to Wolverine's head here in the tank. Nicely done. So Jean here saying, we're here to help Wolverine, Professor, but this is a violation of the worst order. So that is that they're privy to events that Logan has never seen fit to share with them. But the Professor, and she also makes the point that in her view the Professor was wrong to mind wipe Magneto, and she says it's wrong here to violate the psyche of Wolverine without his permission. And Professor X, who's become a bit tougher and harder edged in recent months in the comics, says, I did what had to be done with Magneto. As for Logan, the termination of this Psylink has already been necessitated. So we're going to jump out of Wolverine's psyche because there is problems with the modified Blackbird, and it is burning up on re-entry to Earth's atmosphere, and the shaking of the shuttle is has ripped the Medi unit loose from its moorings, and so Wolverine here in the Medi unit bangs off the hull of the ship, and then they discover from a scream that he's conscious. The shock has awakened him, and so indeed he is. And Professor X is ready to inject him with some metamorphine, and Wolverine says, no painkillers, Charles. It hurts cause my body's fixing itself. I can take it. Don't want to be numb. Going to be numb forever after I buy the farm. So this is Larry Hama's very tough as nails Wolverine, and that typical Larry Hama style dialogue that he gave him. Really nice anchor image here of Wolverine, again with the mask half torn off and looking very beaten up and bruised in this image. And then we see that his healing factor is working away. Professor X makes the point that they don't know exactly how his healing factor works. And so we see wounds on his hands healing, and then being here, and then being undone. Now the coloring doesn't really convey this as well as it ought, but you can see it in the pencils and inks nonetheless. So Wolverine is burning up with a fever. Jean is worried about how to prevent him going into shock. And Professor X makes the point they need to get him urgently to a proper medical facility, which is of course back at the X Mansion. Now this is a great page here where we've got Bishop and Pietro working to keep the Blackbird in one piece and keep it en route to the X Mansion, and they're flying over New Jersey here, and their visible incandescence would flare briefly and fade to black as our molecules displaced over New Jersey, and so they're seen like as if they're a shooting star. So that's a pretty nice little moment there, that view of the Blackbird shooting towards Westchester County. And then here we have this moment between Wolverine and Jean, and he says to her as he holds her hand, or she holds his rather, "You know what I wish, Jean? I wish things could have been different, but I'm glad you're finally going to be happy." So that's him basically saying to her that he wishes her well with her upcoming marriage to Scott, to Cyclops. And of course, he's of the belief here that he's dying. So Professor X is on a comm link to Moira MacTaggert and getting from him advice about the medical procedures he needs to do on the Blackbird to keep Logan alive until they touch down. So we've got Iceman in the background. This, not the best rendering of Iceman by Adam Kubert, maybe the first time he ever drew him, and a bit random there in the background. Of course, Jubilee very concerned for Wolverine's welfare there. This more of the drama on board the Blackbird here, and here we have the payoff for Bishop putting Quicksilver in the commander's seat. So their automatic computer control corrections are offline. So Pietro takes over and is able to correct for deviations in the flight path of the Blackbird that is going to keep the ship together. So nicely rendered here by Adam Kubert and Mark Farmer. So Mark Farmer's still on the inks at this point. So Jubilee very concerned for Wolverine, and Moira MacTaggert basically tells her to be quiet so as to keep the line clear for her medical instructions. And here we have the Blackbird looking like it's about to rip apart, and it is a complete emergency situation with Jean Grey having to use her telekinetic power to keep the ship together. Then in Salem Center we've got the X-Men arriving. We've got Kitty Pryde here still in the X-Mansion and deeply upset with what's going on with Logan, and of course here Scott concerned with Jean and why she mightn't be saying anything. And here we've got a great anchor image of Professor X leaning over the Medi unit with Wolverine, and things are looking not too good for him. And this is a great little moment here, and of course could have done with the Bob Harris footnote, but that's too much to expect from him, where Cyclops here is thinking it's happening all over again. We've got this nice color hold of Jean using her TK powers to hold the Blackbird together, just like the shuttle plummeting through the radiation storm. That's a callback to Uncanny X-Men 100, back when Jean turned into Phoenix in the next issue, 101. And here Professor X goes back into Logan's mind, and we have got this dark, nightmarish, psychic environment where Logan in the Weapon X costume is battling a bear, sentinels, and he's making his way towards Magneto. He says here, "I know where you live." And this is a great image here, and again a nice color hold in the visor of the Weapon X helmet of Wolverine preparing to tackle Magneto. And we get these lines verbatim from Fabian Nicieza's X-Men 25. Oh, Logan, 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 says Magneto here. And look how pumped up he is and nightmarish in the rendering here. This is all by Mark Farmer. This is Mark Farmer ink still. It ends for us both now. Our long association, my most visceral enemy, my most respected foe, is over. And there is the adamantium being ripped out. and Wolverine being torn apart. And we get Professor X's thoughts here. It is not real, it is one man's perception, and I'm walking, even running through it, and I have power here, is what Professor X thinks. So we've got advertisement here, fly over this, and the ads, and here we have Professor X saying that he can surrender himself to this reality and affect it. He can stop Logan from being sucked into that awful light. So Logan on the point of death here, nicely rendered in this anchor image. We see his skin loose, his body almost plastic. And here we have Professor X telling him not to go towards the light, it's death. And Logan here just looking absolutely wrecked and really done with everything, saying, don't you think I know that? So then back in the Blackbird, not only have they managed by the skin of their teeth to get into Earth atmosphere without the ship falling apart, but they find themselves en route into a storm front. So this challenge of getting Wolverine to the medical center in the X-Mansion is just never ending. So really putting the X-Men through their paces here in this issue, Larry Hama. And so we've got even Gambit getting on board, trying to help with the flight controls. And then we've got a moment like where the main hatch is about to fly off and the cabin will depressurize. If that happens, great anchor image here of Bishop shouting instructions to Gambit. Really nice work. And then we're back in Wolverine's psyche, and he is en route to the light. And in the light, he sees what looks like an angel. Who? And then he says, I know you. And it's Illyana. So Illyana recently deceased. And he says to her, and look at the way that Kubert here has warped Wolverine's face. He's like melting away. He's disappearing without his adamantium skeleton. He says, I'm ready to go. But she pushes him away. And he is taken aback by that. So what is going on? It's interesting. There's tension in his psyche in terms of whether he wants to die or not. So here we've got a top-down view of everybody working in the Blackbird to hold it together. Jean using her TK here. And as she says, the hatch is not going to move. I'm not going to let it. So nicely developed word balloons, one for each word here by Pat Prusso. And then Wolverine, of course, just the drama's unrelenting, going into cardiac arrest. His pulmonary stimulation ineffective, vital sign graphs are fading. And yeah, so they're in the middle of the lightning storm. They're struck by lightning. And this makes Jean lose her concentration, holding the hatch with her telekinesis onto the side of the ship. So she's almost sucked out there. And she's in a situation where she needs to replace the hatch, but with what? So this is a little odd moment here where Gambit is trying to hold on up at the flight controls. And Rogue here is getting bumped around, and she says, help me, Remy. So Larry Hama here, not used to writing Rogue and not clear on the fact that she is super strong, can fly, and nigh on invulnerable. So really it doesn't make sense that she would be asking for help from Gambit. She should be helping everybody else, really. So Jean hanging on by her fingertips outside the hatch. And she is selflessly telling everyone else who she pushes into the Blackbird with her TK not to look back, to save the others. And this really seems like it's going to be some kind of perverse rerun of Uncanny X-Men 100 when Jean sacrificed herself to save the rest of the X-Men. And here we go to Wolverine's first person captions where he's saying, how do I pull myself back? Am I out here all alone? And we've got Professor X calling for Jean. He hears Jean's voice in his psyche here. And this is a great moment where he is turning around and saying, turning away from the light and saying, somebody's calling for Eugene. Is that me? Am I calling Eugene? I need your help. Can you hear me? He asks, give me your hand, Gene. And I love the perspective on this hand. So we are looking with the arm, the forearm and hand towards Wolverine. He's reaching out. His fingers are lacking any kind of skeletal support there. He's still in this kind of plastic state. And he says here in his thoughts, give me your hand, Gene, bring me back. And then he's up and out of the medi unit and has grabbed her and saves her and pulls her in to the hatch. And then they're out of the storm front. And Jean says to him, you came back for me. It was you who reached out and took my hand. Sorry, he says here, you got it the other way around, Jean. It was you who reached out and took my hand. So really satisfying conclusion to this dramatic 2/3 of the issue. And great image here of Wolverine hanging on here with all of the sensors and bandages flying off him, and the harness that was holding him onto the medi unit all flying off in the wind and pulling Jean in. Really, really excellent art here by Adam Kubert. And this is the point, this page, where we shift to Dan Green inking Wolverine. And this is tellable by this very distinctive hatching that Dan Green does with a brush on the sinews and lines of muscle on Wolverine here. You can see it very distinctly. And also on the rendering of the aspects of the costume as well. So Dan Green on inks from this page. And then it's Wolverine with his first person narration. Time heals all wounds. And we've got this establishing shot on a calm day of the X-Mansion. Really nice. And then he says, yeah, some better than others. So physical wounds may be healed, but psychic wounds, not so much. And so what's going on in the X-Mansion is there's a training session in the danger room, and Wolverine insists on being included, and Moira makes the point that as his physician she can't allow it. With your healing factor so weakened and your bones leached of their adamantium, there's no telling what horrible and permanent injury you can inflict upon your thick head in the danger room. It's only been 2 weeks, she says to him. You've got to give yourself time. But he's determined. He needs to prove himself and that he still deserves a place on the team. And I just want to point out again with the Dan Green inks here, some of these panels with Wolverine, like his face here, and in particular this 3/4 profile with his chest and arms and head, looks very much like Mark Silvestri. And it's on account of that Dan Green inking. Also this image here, also reminiscent of Silvestri. So Wolverine gets his wish. Great anchor image here of him standing at bay with these battle droids bearing down on him. And he is boastful here. Only 2 of the walking can openers. I can eat them for breakfast. But how is this going to go? So he gets really beaten around, knocked against the wall here, and everybody up in the control booth is horrified. In particular, Cyclops even, and demands that it's enough to get him out of there. But Professor X maintains it's up to Logan. And Logan gets up and says he's just getting warmed up. These piles of scrap metal and circuit boards ain't got nothing on the old knuckle head. And Jubilee insisting it be turned off. Great image here of Cyclops just thin-lipped and gritting his teeth here behind his lips, watching Wolverine about to get pummeled by these battle droids. And Wolverine insists here, great layout as well with these vertical panels, insists that Professor X not listen to Jubilee. And he says, I may be down, but I ain't out, and I'm still the best at what I do. And that was a boast, a phrase, a declaration that always came in advance of popping his claws. And instead of the traditional and the familiar sound effect of snicked, we get shook. And what has happened? And we get the reaction shots of Moira and Professor X, and they're taken aback by what they're seeing down in the danger room. And it's Wolverine, his claws, bone claws. So this is the first time that we've seen Wolverine with bone claws. And so it's a revelation. And here we have either Professor X or Moira McTaggart, probably Professor X, realizing, of course, if the adamantium was leached, what would be left would be these bone claws. His healing factor used to close the wounds. You mean every time he popped his claws, he ripped his own flesh and bled? And so we've got all this cacophony of voices. But the whole point here that the adamantium leached into his forearms was bonding with these claws that were always there. And we'll get a little bit more about that in subsequent pages here. And by the way, we're still Dan Green inks on this page and this page too. So I love this page, a quiet moment with Wolverine and Jubilee relaxing down by Breakstone Lake. We've got these swans here on the lake as well, on Professor X's domain. And we've got Jubilee eating popcorn here, and she throws, in this panel, popcorn towards the surface of the lake for the swans. And we see the popcorn landing on the surface of the lake and sending these ripples out to the edge of the lake. This is really nicely done by Adam Kubert. And of course, we have the image of Wolverine and Jubilee upside down reflected on the surface of the lake. And a nice little moment here where we see that Jubilee is gaining more control over her powers, and that she's able to direct her fireworks with more subtlety and control. So she uses it to wake Wolverine up from his snooze. And she refers to some events from previous issues where she realized that she never thought that her hate for those two creeps who killed her parents, because Jubilee is an orphan, could amplify her powers. It was like waking up with a loaded gun in my hand. And that was something that Claremont laid the hints for early in Jubilee's appearances in Uncanny X-Men, that she could be potentially a very powerful mutant when adult and when having mastered full control over her powers. So Wolverine here pops, and look at the sound effect, schlick, his bone claws. And he says to Jubilee, look, you chose the old knucklehead to have a heart-to-heart with about everything that's happened to her recently. Darling, there are things about myself I ain't got clue one about. Great anchor image here of the bone claws popped. Iconic, really. And this butterfly landing on the tip of one of the claws. Like, if these claws are mine are bone, he says, then I must have been born with them. How come I can't remember them before they were bonded with adamantium? How come I always thought they were implants? And she makes the point as he withdraws, the claws shook, and the butterfly is unscathed, so he's got control over those claws. How can your hands heal if you keep popping them? And he says, this is interesting, I pop them out a few times a day now, keeps the channel open like pierced ears. So it stopped hurting, she asks. Nope. So Wolverine the stoic, yes. And she says, look, in view of all of this, she supposes her problems aren't very important compared to his, but he disagrees and says they are important to him. Before I came to this place, it was like walking in a red haze all the time. There was stuff rolling around inside of me. I don't know what I was. I don't know what it was or where it came from, and I was angry all the time, like some hungry, hurt animal stalking through the woods. So a new chapter coming for Wolverine, and also a new inker on this page. So these last 4 pages are inked by Mark Pennington. And so he talks about coming to Salem Center, to the X-Mansion, the welcome he received from Charlie Xavier, and this is his recommendation to Jubilee. This is his goodbye to her. You stick with the professor, he says. He can help you deal with your powers. He can show you how to live with it, to have meaning. That's the ticket. You stick with Charlie Xavier and he'll set you right, or straight rather. Then he asks her for a light, so she uses her power. She's got that level of control just to light the end of his stogie. But with the pummeling that he's taken physically and the maxing out of his healing factor, he's no longer able to stomach the cigars, and he throws it away and says it's time that he quit those nasty old things anyway. So here we have, it's nighttime now in the mansion, sunset night, and he's packed to leave. It's 4 a.m. and we've got that little picture of Wolverine and Mariko here, and a medicine pouch, maybe recalling Silver Fox too, one of his former, well, both of them now dead, Mariko and Silver Fox. And then Jubilee in her room with Illyana's Banff doll, and Wolverine leaves a note for her. And look at this, you wouldn't expect it, but he's got beautiful cursive handwriting, yes? And he leaves his cowboy hat too. And in the note, he basically says that he's not going to tell Jubilee that she has to be strong, because she is, and that she's one of the strongest people he's ever met. He says to her, hold on to your wonder. You just stick to Professor Xavier like glue. He did all right by this old knucklehead, and he will do good by you. And we see him grabbing his Harley Davidson and pushing it out to the driveway entrance. And then Jubilee's light goes on, and she's wearing his cowboy hat there and waving to him, having read the note. And he waves goodbye as he starts up the bike, and he's on his way. And there's that butterfly from earlier as well. We see it first there, and there it is at the end. And the last thing he says to Jubilee is, and remember that I will always miss you more than you will ever know. Love, Logan. And so it's a new chapter in Logan's life, leaving the X-Men, going out on his own to heal himself. But he recommends, after all the months he spent almost as a father figure to Jubilee, that she stick with Professor X rather than go with him. And so there you go. What an issue. Wolverine 75, Adam Kubert's debut on the series. And I do hope that you enjoyed this review and commentary on this issue. If you did, please like the video on YouTube, and if you haven't done so already, subscribe to the channel and stay tuned for more content like this.